This is a quote by Steve Jobs, the founder and visionary behind Apple Computer. My model for business is the Beatles. They were four guys who kept each other's negative tendencies in check. They balanced each other, and the total was greater than the sum parts. And that's how I see business. Great things in business are never done by one person, they are done by a team of people. Now, I think the topic of creative tension is a really interesting one because people so often sell this narrative that there have to be great feelings, good vibes within a team, that people have to get along really well in the game, but then also as personalities. And I think while there is a general guideline that ideally people would get along and have this sort of aspect, you can see scenarios where people didn't get along, sometimes in their direct relationship within the game itself or music or sport or personality wise, but were able to play fantastically. And it was beneficial for both to be involved, even if they weren't people who saw eye to eye in every sense. So I've picked out some esports examples for you here. And then I'll go into the why I think this is the case, that creative tension is so important at times. So for these examples, I have purposely picked quite extreme examples so as to highlight the premise that's taking place. So a number of these are people who, on a personal level, didn't like each other, and therefore, for that reason, might have split up and gone elsewhere, and in some cases did, but when they were together, played in the game, in the server, particularly well, and it was obviously a fantastic pairing that had success. Or there may be people who just didn't like the approach or philosophy of the other guy, and so they talked as though they didn't like the way it was and they wanted a guy that fit them instead. But you look at the results, and even if they had differing philosophies and not necessarily tons of overlap between the way they thought the game should be played, you were able to see that it worked and it had its own success and its own charm to those differing perspectives kind of synergizing, being synthesized into one. So in CS, Counter-Strike, we're going to go with Eolithic first of all. And the two players we're going to talk about here played in Eolithic together, and then they later played in a team called NOA, which are Element and Executor. Now, Element was the young prodigy who could read the game, had fantastic intuitive sense to know individually what would happen, but then could transfer that to the team and read what was happening in the game and where the opponent would be and how the opponent was switching things up. And based on what he was able to see early in the game, what the opponent might be doing in the middle of the round and when they might attack and with what tactic. Then you paired that with Executor, and Executor was a guy who was fantastic at preparing strategies, at calling strategies. So when you gave him the godlike kind of reading of the game of Element and his tactics that he prepared and worked on, then he could call the right strategy. And this combo was one of the best in-game leading combos we have ever seen in both Eolithic and NOA. Two of the best teams of all time in terms of like the peak level they hit. Not necessarily in terms of accomplishments, specifically in the case of Eolithic, didn't have many accomplishments. But in terms of what they were able to actually accomplish in those best games that they had and the best runs, absolutely fantastic. And what a very deadly dynamic duo this particularly was. But the reason they didn't get along is these two had a massive personality clash. Executor had Element kicked out of Eolithic when Element had created Eolithic and they'd won a CPL Europe event, and then Element had a grudge against Executor, and the vibe always was, well, Executor was the established OG who'd accomplished so much in other teams. Element was that rising, up-and-coming young lion who's cocky and he doesn't necessarily kind of brushes aside the idols of yesteryear, and you still have to prove to him that you're good on a skill level. And so maybe he wasn't showing respect to Executor, and then Executor was like, well, I have more cachet in the scene than you, and you still haven't got the accomplishments that I have, so I'm going to hold you back. And so they were always battling in that sense, and that's why they only played together short periods of time. But when they did put their personality differences aside, their clashes, fantastic in-game combination. Now in League of Legends, there's a couple of instances I want to go with here. So one is in CLG, Counter Logic Gaming, particularly the Prime lineup we're talking about here, which is the North American one. And this is the team where in 2011 through to early 2012, they had Hotshot GG, top laner and founder of the org, and they had Saint Vicious as the jungler. Now, what's funny about this is another area where it's just personality-wise that these two guys didn't get along. Hotshot GG is more, in theory, more of like a laid-back guy who whines a bit, but he's more the passive-aggressive type, whereas Saint Vicious is a guy who complains, but he's more the in-your-face, like, we're going to resolve this now, we're going to get to the bottom of this, someone's going to win this argument, it's probably going to be me, and we're going to, like, resolve it like this. So you get a passive-aggressive guy and a direct abrasive, up in your face type guy like that, it's usually not going to work out very well. And it'll usually work out with the passive aggressive guy finding a way to ship the aggressive guy out in that particular sense, which is what happened here. But what's funny is, in the game, they work together so well. People will forget about this because it was season 1 going into early season 2, so not a lot of people watching the video right now will have ever seen them play, but they were a fantastic combo of jungler and top laner, because at the time, it's only really season 3 when we really kicked into that world because of the dangerous assassin meta, where you had to have this jungle mid synergy that was so important. Before that, the jungler was often about how he affected the top lane, since the top lane could still be a carry position. Now, what's interesting is, aside from earlier on in season 1 and early season 1 to early season 2, Hotshot was still one of the best top laners. Was still a player who could carry, and he could play all sorts of different champions. And part of what kept him safe, part of what allowed him to get ahead in games, part of what allowed, say, Vicious to work out was this duo that the two of them had. I mean, they even had a system where at one point in time they noticed that the team was particularly bad at fighting for Dragon, so they would just give up the Dragon sometimes. They'd take a bunch of waves top while the other team was fighting and taking the Dragon, and at least Hotshot and Saint are going to be fed. Likewise, Saint's going to come and gank for the top lane for Hotshot, because then he's going to take a wave of CS that's there. Well, it's his jungle tax, his lane tax, right? And so then St. Vicious are going to get more fed, and he was one of the original carry jungle style players. So for both of their styles, for both of what they needed in the game and the team approach, this was fantastic. This worked really well for them. And they were a particularly successful team at the time. Lots of top 4s, lots of finals, couple of championships, one of the best teams in the world on numerous occasions, and it worked together fantastically. It's just personality-wise they couldn't get along, and it was kind of always destined to blow up in that sense. Another League of Legends example is going to be in Korea this time, which is going to be MIG, Maximum Impact Gaming, Blaze, and Azubu Blaze. So we're talking 2012 Blaze here. And this was the pairing of Ambition and Reapered. Now, this is one of the best solo lane combos of all time. At the time, they both were contenders, if not the best player in the world at their positions. Now, the overlap for that doesn't really work as much. Ambition really became the best like early 2013. I mean, before that, people like Froggen, Alex Sitch. I mean, there's a bunch of people you could kind of list who people would have probably said was better, but Ambition was always up there. Reapered certainly was the best back in spring to summer when you look at that of 2012, and started to evolve a little bit because you got people like Shy and Flame came through in early 2013. So the timing doesn't match up for them both to be the best at the same time. But in terms of the combo, they were definitely the best combo at that particular point in time. You look at all the other great top laners, they didn't have a super sick mid laner. You look at all the other great mid laners, they didn't have a super sick top laner. The best combo at their time, fantastic in terms of how they would dominate the game. Captain Jack had his issues, but was a fantastic team fighting AD carry. So they were getting very powerful individually in the lanes, and then they would go and dominate the game. And the way they would work together, because Reaper was a guy who would roam, would have the team group up because he was the shot caller, and then take down towers, take skirmishes, take fights at certain points in time. And Ambition's job was just be this great mid laner, farm up, be very powerful, play your AP champions, play your Rise or whatever else, and dominate the game. And you know that Reaper's going to be there on his Jax, whatever it might be, Aurelia, and he's going to dominate in his own way. And so together they had a lot of success. They won an OGN, they won MLG. They were a fantastic team, had some deep runs. But what was the problem? It was actually a mixture of personality in terms of like, these are the two guys who really want to be like the leader voice within the team. And obviously Ambition won out. He was to CJ until almost the bitter end, until the LCK era when he's even a jungler in the team. But it's also that the team, but I think mainly led by Ambition, didn't want to have a single shot caller. They decided after Blaze had its issues, after they lost in the semi-finals of Champions to Frost in summer, after they'd won the previous season, and then obviously most famously they lost in Game 5 blind pick of the regional finals to their deadly rivals Najin Sword, and didn't go to Worlds. At this point in time, the team decided, right, these shot calls aren't working, we don't trust in the shot calling approach, and they actually wanted to not have a single shot caller, to do it as a team. Now you saw they had their own successes as a team in early 2013 with this team fighting style that they had, and then just having Flame and Ambition farm up. So they took some of the basics of what they had before and took away the shot calling aspect. But they weren't as creative beyond that. They didn't have as much variety and versatility to their play as they did with Reaper. Reaper had his own successes minorly, trying to take his to the other extreme. I don't think they were ever as good, though, as when they were together in that particular sense. Same way in CLG, Hotshot and Saint Vicious weren't ever as good as when they were together. Element and Executor weren't ever as good, really, ultimately, as when they were together in terms of the impact they had on the game. Now, my last example is going to be from CSGO, which is in early CSGO in 2013, we had Shox and Existence pair up with each other. Now, they'd played together in some of the teams that, later became verygames in the past and verygames itself. And they'd always had this same issue going backwards and forwards. And it mainly is not so much a personality issue, because they seem as personalities that can get along. It's just that they have totally different approaches. First of all, Shox is that cavalier guy, might not want to practice that much, might want to play a loose style, might just want to fuck around, and then just come in the game and do what he wants. Meanwhile, Existence is that model professional who thinks you should practice a set amount every day. You should always put in your homework. You should always plan what you're going to do before you do meticulously, then try to execute that plan and live up to what you had in mind that you were going to do. So different approaches, but when they got together, the creative tension between them, where Shox's raw skill, his firepower and ability to play in clutch situations and come through against teams like NiP, opened up Existence's mind to having a little bit more of that loose approach to the game, at least letting Shox do some mid-round calls himself, which obviously was his strength in the game, and as a result open up verygames a little bit from being such a strat-heavy team, which had been very successful against everyone except NiP, and then Shox himself was willing to play within the system of Existence and practice more and be more of a professional than he was in other teams, and so when they were together, they were the best team in the world. They are one of the all-time great top 5, top 6 teams of all time, that verygames lineup, and you can't necessarily say in this particular case that they were worse apart, but that's just a great example of them working together, how the creative tension really worked for them. So I've given you a CSGO example, a 1.6 example, and 2 examples from League of Legends there. Now, one of the reasons and the general way I think of how the creative tension works is, first and foremost, when you have creative tension like this, like two people who don't agree in terms of their approach with each other or personality-wise, one of the really good things is that they're not going to feel undue respect for the other guy if they think the other guy has a bad idea or the wrong idea or something that doesn't fit the way that the game is going to be played by this team, and they'll be willing to say it. And so as a result, you get pushback on bad ideas or just those that don't fit your particular team or unit. So as a result, you don't get this culture of yes men who all just like each other. You also tend to only then come to compromises in ways that actually fit everyone who's involved. And so rather than get some really extreme ideas that are suited to one approach or the other approach, you're actually going to get, and as a result might only suit one or two people, you're going to get ones that work roughly for everyone, and someone might gain something in one area to give up by giving up something in another area, and collectively it's going to work for the group. This is why I think actually you get this phenomenon that I've noticed again and again in the world of music, where you will get this creative tension and people split up the band, go off and make other bands or become solo artists, and you know what? They're not as good in those other bands or solo artists as they were as a group together when they had this creative tension, which seemed to be driving them apart, but also produced some of their best work. So, I mean, an obvious example of this would be the band The Smiths, who are around for around 4 years in the mid-80s. And the two people we're talking about for the creative tension here is obviously the guitarist Johnny Marr and the songwriter Stephen Morrissey, but he's called Morrissey, isn't he? Now, funnily enough, these two guys together, one of the all-time great singer-songwriter musician combos. But you read interviews about them, you read books about them. Some of the lyrics that Morrissey wrote, Marr didn't like particularly, and probably wouldn't have selected himself, but are still good songs. Morrissey, when he later on did his solo stuff, very rarely got musicians that were as good as Marr or had his particular style. And so as a result, a lot of people who like the Smiths don't necessarily like Morrissey's music because they don't feel as though it has the same vibe or the same atmosphere to it, even if they like Morrissey's lyricism. I mean, the only album that doesn't really apply to is Viva Hate, the first one, solo one that Morrissey did, because it felt pretty much like they did try to just do like a poor man's version of the Smiths for that one. And one of the most famous examples, the one that Steve Jobs himself cited, is the Beatles, because their songwriting duo, or obviously in this sense it was literally the people writing the songs directly, was Lennon and McCartney, guys who on a personal level didn't seem to necessarily get along. Now they did, if you read more interviews, it's not as simple as like they hated each other, they didn't. They just had a different approach, again I think in terms of like seriousness and who wanted to take it more easy. But together, fantastic, and wrote some great songs. Now, not from my personal opinion, I don't particularly like the Beatles, but many people enjoy them. Many people think they're fantastic. A lot of people, their solo stuff isn't hailed as great, right? So it's a great example. I think another good example, personally, for me, is actually Led Zeppelin. Because for me, Led Zeppelin's one of the all-time great bands, and individually, everyone in this band is incredible at their craft or their instrument. But I tried listening to solo material and other work of everyone else in this band, except John Bonham, who's obviously dead, and I didn't like pretty much any of the solo stuff by any of the other people. I thought it was actually pretty much shit compared to what they did in a band as Led Zeppelin. Now, an example where it's not necessarily approach, but just the personalities, like you had with the Hotshot GG St. Vicious thing. I think a great example where the personalities don't fit, but the skills in the game do fit, like St. Vicious and Hotshots did, would be from sports, and that would be obviously Shaq and Kobe, the team that won the 3 NBA championships from 2000 to 2002 in the NBA. Now, what's funny is personality-wise and approach-wise, these guys didn't get along at all. Like, personality-wise, Shaq's a guy who's a very fun-loving guy, but he wants to be the alpha male of the group and wants other people to kind of fall in line, and then he'll be the big dog and the leader at all times. And he wants to just get into playing form by the time the playoffs come around and just chill out during the summer and have fun, put in like 8 out of 10 effort. Kobe's the guy where he's a 10 out of 10 effort guy, and he's very antisocial, so he wants to be respected for his skills. And if you want to be respected by him, you better show him by working hard and playing hard, and you better come in every day and be prepared and have a great work ethic, because otherwise if you lose, he's going to put it down to that. You didn't work hard enough. So you can see how they were always going to clash, and it probably couldn't have worked forever. But you look at how they actually played in the game, one of the all-time great combos, if not the best combo, in terms of actual just like the level these two players were able to play at. Incredible inside-out combo. If you wanted a sick big man like Shaq, you'd want an amazing perimeter player like Kobe to be able to play off him and to get his opportunities when the ball's kicked back out, and to have less defenders on him in the zone defense era when that kicked in. This is an ideal setup overall, and as a result, they were wildly successful and had that three-peat of championships. So I think it's a very interesting concept, this creative tension, because you can see how it drives people apart, how actually when it exists, it is rare that it lasts for a long time. Because that force alone, especially when they then don't have results, will drive them apart. And in almost every one of these instances, it's usually that made them split apart. But when it's working, when it's at its best, something extra comes out of this because of this aspect where you only compromise on the really important things in a meaningful manner. And you have pushback on bad ideas, and you're going to find things in the group that are going to be the overlap, they're going to work for everyone, and aren't just one person's extreme vision in one particular sense. So I think it's an interesting concept, and one that shouldn't be written off by people who think, well, these people don't like each other, so they shouldn't play together, or, oh, you know, these guys over here have different mental approaches to the game, so they should find someone who fits their mental approach. As we saw when Pronax, for example, left Fnatic and Olafmeister got in people to play the loose style he wanted to play. Yeah, he won tournaments, didn't win majors though. Whereas the old Fnatic, with a style that was more of a compromise between Olaf's style and Pronax's style, was able to win majors. So I think there's something to this concept.